All right. Well, we've had a water discussion in February of this year. We had Olivia Sanwong and Zone 7 come in, and it was kind of more of a historical look at Pleasanton's water. And today I'm really excited. We're going to dive deep into the PFAS issue. And we have the best people that we can have from the City of Pleasanton to give us this presentation. I hope that everybody saw the attachment that Steve sent out with the committee's invitation to this meeting of some of the questions that we put together to dig into this. And so Todd and Kathleen are here from the city, and we're so grateful for you guys to come and help answer our questions about this important issue. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Kathleen and Todd.
Yeah, thank you. And I did want to just take a minute to thank you for having us at your meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to cover all the questions that you have for us today. I did want to introduce Dan Rep. I know Kate had pointed him out. Dan Rep is one of the newest members of the City of Pleasanton and my Operations Services Department team. He's the Managing Director of Utilities and Environmental Services. And so he works with Todd really closely along with his other staff in those two areas. And so he's getting inducted into all of the Pleasanton organizations. So he started with us in late June under COVID. So virtual is pretty much how we've all been getting to know each other. So, it was helpful for Steve to send the questions in advance, and Todd has those, and he's going to go over just I think a quick little brief kind of presentation. I know this is more of a Q&A, but it might be helpful just to give you the overview, especially in regards to the water supply, and then we can field any questions that you may have, specific to that, and then dive into the PFAS if you're okay with that. Perfect. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Todd.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm gonna share my screen here. Host disabled.
Oh, okay, hang on.
Yeah.
Share screen. Wait, that's not for me. Hang on a minute. Okay. Maybe hang on. Who knows how I can get Todd to share his screen?
You want to make me the co-host? Kate, if you make me the co-host in the participant window.
Oh. Okay.
I could do that.
Oh, here we go. Jill, more, make co-host. So now you have the power?
Well, let's hope. So let's see if we can. Okay, that should do it. Kathleen, you want to give it a try again?
Or Todd?
Todd, yep.
Yeah, I can do that now. Thank you.
Sure. Cool.
Hey, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so like Kathleen said, I did put together some slides that went through I think the majority of your questions. I can go through them quickly. You can interrupt and we can pause, and then whatever I don't cover, we can hit at the end. So however you would like to do this is okay with me. So just starting off real quick, City of Pleasanton's water supply and distribution. We deliver approximately 4,500 million gallons of water a year. That's 14,000 acre feet a year. I'm probably going to talk in acre feet for the rest of this, mostly because that's what Zone 7 reports on. So it's a good number to use, to about 22,000 customers. And if you look at the Tri-Valley as a whole, DSRSD, City of Livermore / Cal Water, and City of Pleasanton, approximately a good rule of thumb, I mean, it's not exact, is we all take about a third of the water. So that's kind of gives you a good rule of thumb of, roughly where everybody's at. The City of Pleasanton has 2 water sources. So 75% of our water approximately is purchased from Zone 7. And zone 7 uses a combination of groundwater and surface water. I would say, depending on where you're at and what time of the year, but it varies. But in general, about 80% of their water is surface water and about 20% is groundwater. And that does fluctuate depending on the year though. The other 25% of our water comes from a groundwater allotment that the city has. So we're allowed to every year pump up to 3,500 acre feet a year in addition to what we get from zone 7. And that allotment is a strict allotment. If we go over that amount, we do pay a penalty. If we go under that amount, we get to store some of it or for the next year and we can roll it over. But in general, 3,500 is where we try to be every year. So I know there was a lot of questions on zone 7 supply and how does the state allocation work and the variability. So I put up this slide. This is from zones. This is one of zone 7's documents, I think from about a month ago at one of their board meetings. And this is regional. So keep in mind, that's all of us. But if you look at City of Pleasanton, we're about 1/3 of this. So this table A allocation, zone 7 gets an allocation of 81,000 acre feet a year from the state water project. And then every year the state gives an allocation of a certain percent that they're going to actually get of that. And that allocation varies based on what's going on with water availability, right? The drought conditions, the snowpack, all what's going on with the Delta, all of that plays into it. It gets pretty complicated. That's kind of zone 7's, expertise. What the city usually sees is this chart, which kind of tells us what do we have looking ahead. So you can kind of see right at the top, the table A allocation in 2019, 75%. 2020, they were projecting 15%. Right now, it's actually 20% is what it's probably going to be for 2020. And then 2021 is 10, and then 22 through 24, they're just projecting the average of 49. So I guess the point being here is it's extremely variable. During the drought, the numbers got to 5. I think they even talked about 0. But that's how variable these numbers are. So what zone 7 does is they basically look at their incoming supply. So we'll look at 2019. So they had an incoming supply of 68,600. These numbers, I think, may have slightly been tweaked since then, but the state water project is about 60,000 of that acre feet because of the 75% allotment. Another 8,000 comes from runoff from Lake Del Valle and what rights they have at Lake Del Valle. So those are the two major surface water sources. The other third source is groundwater. And so that is about 10,000 acre feet. The groundwater source, they really try every year to keep it to around that number, just to manage the groundwater basin. They're trying to keep it full, protect the levels. Zone 7 is they watch over the groundwater basin. So that's a number that you'll commonly see. So what you can tell is that for the 2019 year, they had a total water supply of 82,000. But the demand from the 3 retailers was only 40,000. So there's an excess there. So the remaining 40,000 they put into storage for other years. So how that works, storage, Arroyo recharge, that helps kind of recharge the groundwater, raise the levels. State water project carryover. So there's some water that they had rights to for that table A, and they just didn't use it, and they get to carry it over for the next year. Lake Del Valle, they can do the same thing. And then Kern Banks, right, halfway to Southern California, they can store water there. So for that year, they took their water and stored it. You can then look at 2020. 2020, only 15% allocation. So the state water project only gave them 12,000 acre feet. Which obviously, and then Lake Del Valle was a little bit more, and they actually, because the water was so low, I believe they used some transfers. So transfers are basically where they water from other agencies through the state water project, or not even the state water project, that didn't use it for the year and basically are buying that water, and that water comes at a premium though. So because the difference is 55,000, you know, is the water, let me, sorry, one more slide. Groundwater was 11,000, right? So they try to keep that same number. So you can tell that the 22, what is that, 23,000 is less than the demand for the year. So that's when they start dipping into their water supply. The very same places that they put it into last year, they take it out of this year. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview, because I think there's this conception that the groundwater is our only storage, and that's how we're getting our water during the drought years. And that's not really the case. The majority of this water is coming from the state water, surface water still. This is the game that Zone 7 has to play. And it's a very complicated, you know, thing for them to balance, of storing water, pulling it out, storing water, pulling it out. Groundwater does play a factor in that. And if you have consecutive drought years, they will dip into the groundwater even heavier. But a lot of this is managed through the state water project and storage related to it. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so this is Dan. So I just wanted to ask the group, you know, I mean, this area here, and understanding the complexities of how water is moved around, and you can see that it's like a chess game. And Zone 7 is playing that constantly, because the state makes their adjustments almost continually. So they're, you know, the state's looking at snowpack, state's looking at what's in their reservoirs, things like that. So this is going on in the background all the time. And so I know that, you know, one of the challenges, I mean, certainly for a water manager, and certainly for us in the City of Pleasanton, we're not always in the front of that line and understanding what Zone 7 is doing in the background. But it's really important, because this happens not only here in the Tri-Valley, but it's happening in the region. And so
That's it. No electronics tomorrow. No, I don't like that. Just get off. Dad's been standing there for 5-10 minutes.
Oops. So anyway, that's, I just wanted to point out that it's very complex, and it is a moving target. You know, Zone 7 is constantly trying to make adjustments to what's coming in and what's available to them. But I just wanted to put that out. This is where most people struggle. And as Todd points out, the groundwater sits there kind of a constant. And it gets used, not used, depending on what's going on with the other sources of supply. So just providing that overview. So anyway, that's super complicated and hard to understand.
One other piece that I wanted to mention too is that annually, and for the last couple of years, Todd has worked with our utility staff to request water from Zone 7. So each retailer, based off of the projected usage for our 22,000 customers, makes an annual request to Zone 7. And so that's how they get the collective from the Tri-Valley retailers. And so, you know, we have to, as an agency, look at our customer usage, any upcoming, you know, development. Perhaps we may have added, you know, recycled water. So we're actually reducing that request. And so annually, each retailer makes a request to Zone 7 for their allocation. So that's another component too that plays into what Zone 7 is asking for from the State Water Project.
Okay, so in terms of how water gets delivered, I know there was a couple questions related to that. You know, where is groundwater located? Where is surface water located? So here's a map of Zone 7's transmission system. So this is how they pump water to all three retailers. What you'll see on the right side, pointer, but is the two treatment plants, Patterson Pass wastewater treatment plant. It's kind of the blue box in the right corner. And then there's a Del Val wastewater treatment plant. It's a south box, or it's a blue box in the south corner. Those are where the surface water comes in and gets treated. And Del Val also gets treated at the Del Val surface water gets treated there. So the majority of Zone 7 surface water comes in on the south and east side of their system. And then it gets pumped into pipes, big transmission pipes that are, it doesn't get pumped directly into the city's distribution system. There is a cutoff between Zone 7's piping and the different retailers' piping. The groundwater wells, they're on the west side of Zone 7 system. There's essentially 4 major groupings. There's a chain of lake wells, which is kind of in the central area on the border of Pleasanton and Livermore. Then there's the Stone Ridge well, which is on Stone Ridge on the east side. The Mocho wells, which are by Santa Rita, kind of by Santa Rita and Stone Ridge. And then there's the Hop Yard wells. Those wells also pump into the Zone 7's transmission system. So depending on the year, depending on what's pumping, you're getting a blend of surface water and groundwater inside Zone 7's transmission system. Obviously, if you live on the eastern portion, and Zone 7's pumping their groundwater wells, it's probably going to be a little bit more groundwater heavy than say on the west side where it's coming from surface water. So everything is blended. However, where you're at in the system and how much groundwater is being pumped is going to really dictate that percentage. And so it's really hard to pinpoint and say, Pleasanton gets, X% groundwater and X% surface water. It really can't, it doesn't work that way. It's really a blend, and it really depends on what Zone 7's got going on during that time. The other thing you'll see on this map, it's hard to see, but all these little red dots along the blue lines, that's where we call those turnouts. That's where the water leaves Zone 7 system and goes into the distribution systems of each retailers. So the next slide I have here is the city's system. And you can see we have the red dots here are the 7 turnouts that Zone 7 delivers water to our system. We have turnout, and then on the table on the right kind of tells you the percentage of water that comes each in those turnouts. And then we also have our wells, our 3 wells, well 5, 6, and 8, and we have the percentages there, which also tie directly into our system. You could tell T1 and T2, we very rarely use those. They're just not needed for us hydraulically. They don't deliver much water in our system. T2 we will bring on an emergency, but those 2 don't. The majority of our water comes from T3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You can see they're just kind of spread out through our system. And then our wells 5, 6, and 8 are they're on Santa Rita, and the well 8 is actually in our operation yard. So this kind of gives you a feel of where water comes in, and the percent. You could tell it's pretty evenly distributed, as you would imagine. I think there was questions as how does water get distributed in our system? This map, I know it's a hard map to look at, but what you're actually seeing is not streets. You're actually seeing all our water piping on this map. And essentially the majority of all our turnouts and all our wells pump into what we call our lower zone, which is all that area in green. And we have 2 large 8 million gallon tanks, one by Foothill, one by Sycamore, that help store water. And that storage for water is to help with peak demands. As things fluctuate, we rely on our tanks. It helps us with fire flow. It helps us with emergency storage. So the majority of the water comes into this lower zone. And then all these little different color areas that you see kind of on the west side and even on the south side, those are higher elevations. So what we do is we take water from the lower zone and we pump it up to the higher zones. And each one of those zones has tanks. So in total, we have 18 pressure zones and 20 reservoirs and 14 pump stations. So we're literally taking water from zone 7, storing it, and then pumping it up to all the little different pressure zones to where it could be used and stored there. So that's the other thing we wanted to point out. You know, when you get water coming in from zone 7 turnout, it goes into piping. It's been blended by zone 7 from different sources. It then gets blended with our wells. It then goes into a storage tank. It then can get pumped up. So there's a lot of variability in the water, basically. By the time it hits your tap, you know, you can't just say, hey, it came from this one area. There's a lot of opportunity for this water to blend. So we truly are a blend of surface water and groundwater when you look at our system.
And this is Dan, I just wanted to add real quickly, you know, this is pretty common for water systems in general. So they're a network, and water moves throughout the network. It's not necessarily segmented. I mean, it's not, oh, we want this water to go there, we want this water to go there. So it's pretty common for water systems to be a network where water can move throughout the system without, you know, a lot of manipulation. And that's purpose, because again, if there's, you know, if you have a big main break or something like that, we need to isolate. You still want to be able to feed water into an area that maybe where we've had an area where we've had some damage and things like that. So you know, Pleasanton is not unique in this kind of a network system where water can move throughout it in lots of different ways, where it's not necessarily controlled or segmented in a particular area. So just wanted to point that out.
So unless there's, I mean, that's kind of a really rough overview of how we get our water, the different sources. Unless there's any questions on that, I can move on to the PFAS, right, kind of regulations and some of the other questions you had related to that. So just a very quick overview. Obviously, PFAS is not regulated yet in California in terms of having a MCL. But that is underway, and there is recommendation levels in place that do provide some guidance, and in fact, even some requirements now with the passing of certain recent assembly bills. So currently, California Division of Drinking Water has issued notification levels for 2 of the major PFAS. I think, as everybody knows, there could be up to 5,000 PFAS chemicals. 2 of them are heavily studied, PFOA and PFOS, and there is, you know, probably another 15 or so that are being trailing behind in terms of, you know, the study of it, the science of it, and the regulation of it. So for California, the notification levels for PFOA and PFOS are 5.1 and 6.5 respectively. And so this notification level is what is required for zone 7 or the city is if we test above this, we have to notify city council or the governing board so that they are aware that we basically have this chemical in our water supply. There's no recommendations to shut down the water supply based on this level. It's this is a notification essentially that you do have this though in your system. DDW, the Division of Drinking Water, they're also looking currently at 7 other PFAS chemicals and considering notification levels. I don't have a timing for when those will come out. I have heard that one of them, PFBS, the second one here, is likely to come out around the end of the year or shortly after that, but that can change. The second thing is response levels. So response levels are 10 for PFOA and 40 for PFOS. So if you have a response issue, if you test for these two chemicals above the response level, then it is recommended that you either A, take the water supply out of service, B, treat to try to bring it below, or if you don't do either of those two, then you do a formal notification to the public. So you go beyond just notifying council, but you're required to notify the entire public for that. In terms of setting the MCL, there's basically a two-step process to formally regulate it, and the state is starting this process. So the
Todd, do you mind explaining what MCLs and PHGs are, just for anybody who isn't aware?
Sure, I'll do that right now. So basically PHG stands for a public health goal, and OEA for the state, there's basically two branches. There's OEA, which is more of a science health-based organization that takes a look at the contaminants and establishes a level, and these levels are aggressively low, with the idea that you try to eliminate the health risk. And so they set a target level for that. The Division of Drinking Water on the other side comes in and says, when they establish the MCL, which is a maximum contaminant level that each retailer would have to meet, are required to meet, what they're trying to do is establish an MCL that can realistically, economically meet that PHG. So that public health goal. So if it's realistic, if it's economically feasible, if it's technically feasible, then that MCL will equal the PHG. And in a lot of cases, it does. But sometimes you can't reach that PHG. Sometimes we can't even detect to that level. Sometimes the treatment technology can't get to that level, and you will see a value that's higher than the PHG. And there is cases of that. So right now where the state is at is they're trying to establish a PHG, a public health goal for PFOA and PFOS. And we were told that the draft of that value will come out the end of this year. And then there's a process to finalize that number by the summer of 2021. Once that value comes out, then the Division of Drinking Water comes into play. They look at and they establish an MCL. We were told that a draft of that they're looking for at the summer of 2022. And then they would finalize that value for the winter of 2023. So for the city, when we look at when would we have to comply? You know, we're looking at that winter 2023 number. That's the number where, and that number can change, but that's the number where right now we see regulations may kick into place. There was questions of, has PFAS been regulated in other states? And so the question is yes, there has been formal MCLs established in other states. There are some states that are in the same area as California where they've done recommendations and they're in the process of doing MCL. So I just put a few up here. There's a lot going on with the various states. The states are definitely driving the process, I would say. The EPA at a national level will also establish an MCL, and they are also in the process of doing that. But because of the timing with that, I would say the states are starting to be out in front. So they're not waiting to see the EPA's value and deciding to adopt that value. They're actually jumping out in front and trying to establish them. But what I wanted to show you with this is that the values differ state by state. You can look and which chemicals are being regulated and how. So Massachusetts takes, I think 6 different values, and they of 6 different PFAS, and say the total of them must be 20. Then you go to Michigan, and they've looked at each different chemical and established an MCL for each different chemical. And then you can also see the variability in these numbers here. California is looking right now to establish just PFOA and just PFOS. So, you know, they may look more like the New York value here, where they just have 2 values initially. But as years go on after that, you may start to see more get rolled up, and I'm sure they're considering looking at a common value to look at all PFAS in general or group them in general. So this kind of just gives you a feel of the variability. I would say there was questions on how do they establish this. Each state has their process. It's very similar to how I described the California process, where they look at health concerns versus feasibility. I would say that the reason why you see different values is it depends on what's going on in each state, right? Which chemical has been a known issue at that state, which studies have been successful at that state and been able to, in terms of toxicologists, toxicology studies, science studies, to establish it. So there's a lot of variability in these numbers, but I would say that California is probably looking, they're probably trending towards the lower end of these numbers. So how do our values compare to the notification levels and response levels currently? So what I have here is Zone 7 test results for PFOA on the left, PFOS on the right. These are quarterly averages, so they're running annual averages. But each quarter, I can tell you, is pretty similar. So when you see an average here, there's not a lot of variability. So for PFOA, you could see all of Zone 7's wells are below the response level for PFOA of 10. So that's that red bar. The orange bar is the notification level. So all their wells are below the response level. They do have the Mocho wells are either right at the notification level or above. So PFOS is more of the problem here in the Tri-Valley. So PFOS, the red line is the response level, the orange level is the notification. So you can see that on the bars, the 3 bars on the left are the chain of lake wells, and they're below the response levels, but they get very close. The Mocho wells are either at the level or above it. In particular, Mocho 1 well is up to around 100. What Zone 7 does, though, Zone 7, because they have so many wells, they can blend their wells. And so, for example, at the chain of lakes, you'll see the first 3 bars are chain of lakes 1, 2, and 5. And then the 4th bar is in darker blue, is the treated chain of lake wells. So before water leaves their wells and gets into the transmission system, they blend them. And when they blend them, those concentrations come down because you're having the lower wells with lower concentrations blend with the higher ones. So you can see that blue value comes down to about 20 before it leaves the system. For Mocho 1, they have 2 ways of doing it, treating it. They can run it through their demineralization plant, which is located on Santa Rita. And demineralization is a very effective way, RO basically, reversive osmosis. It's a very effective way of reducing PFAS significantly. They also have the opportunity with their wells, Mocho wells, to blend. So they can do both. So you can see for the blue bar all the way to the far right, the dark blue bar, that's the treated Mocho, and that drops all the way down to about 30 before it actually hits our system. So Zone 7 blends and treats to get values below the response level. So for the city wells, we have 3 wells. You can see them there. Blue is 5, green is well 6, orange is well 8. Because those wells are in a similar location, you see a very similar pattern to Zone 7. For PFOA, all 3 wells are below the response level, and only 1 is even above the notification level, and that's well 8. For PFOS, well 5 and well 6 are below the response level, but well 8 is above the response level. It's at a value of 100. And there's no coincidence that our well 8 is in relatively near Mocho 1 for Zone 7. So you're seeing similar values probably from a similar plume. So for the city, because we do not have the ability to blend, we do not have the ability to treat, we do not have any treatment facilities like a RO plant. We have put the well 8 in standby with the state. And standby means that it essentially does not operate. And it hasn't operated since we first tested for this chemical early June 2019. So this well is available as an emergency, and its use is very restricted with the state, but essentially we do not operate it. We operate off of our well 5 and 6 currently. So I wanted to jump in, what are the impacts to PFAS? So you're going to have impacts to Zone 7 and their supply, and you're going to have impacts to the city and their supply. And obviously Zone 7 supply impacts all of Tri-Valley as well, right? So for Zone 7, the PFAS really, future regulations will likely impact the chain of lake wells. As those numbers come down, they will have issues with operating their chain of lake wells. The Mocho wells and because of the DMIN plant, they will likely be able to treat and meet any future regulations. It's really the chain of lake wells that are going to be a problem. So what are the impacts if they shut down their chain of lake wells? And this was at one of their recent board meetings. These kind of 3 major bullets was, 1, it would reduce their groundwater supply by about 25%. So although they have groundwater at other locations that are either not impacted by PFAS or can be treated, you can't just simply make up for it because of where it's at, right? You can't overpump one area, you get localized issues versus the other area. So they would basically be looking at a groundwater reduction of 25%, and they would be more dependent on surface water for that additional 25% to make up that difference in groundwater. And what that means is higher costs for the purchase of replacement surface water, especially during drought years when you're highly dependent on that groundwater to kind of make up the lack of surface water coming in. So that means, you got to get more surface water through transfers, through storage, through exchange, and that comes with the premium. The other is just a reduced reliability. Probably the best thing about groundwater is it's local and it's in the system locally. If you have any issues with surface water delivery system, and I think we all know about the challenges with the Delta or the SBA, which is basically the pipeline system that delivers the water from the Delta, there can be a lot of issues with conveyance, shutdowns, earthquakes, environmental restrictions, when you could potentially have outages, even if they're short-term outages. Groundwater kind of helps buffer you during those short-term outages. So as you reduce your groundwater pumping ability, you reduce your reliability. So for these 3 main reasons, Zone 7 is exploring looking at PFAS treatment at the chain of lake wells, because they would, their staff's recommendation initially here is to try to keep those groundwater wells active. And so they are exploring treatment at those wells with GAC and iExchange treatment technology, which we can talk about later, which is very similar to what we're looking at. For the city, PFAS impacts are a little bit different, but also a little bit similar. So future regulations for us will likely impact all our wells, all 3 wells. So what are the impacts if we shut down our wells? Well, 1, we become 100% dependent upon Zone 7 for water supply. And although it's the same groundwater basin, there is some control when you have your own, groundwater and have your ability to pump 25% of it yourself. So we become 100% dependent on them. There's also an increase in water supply costs. So currently, not talking about PFAS, but just currently, it is cheaper to pump city groundwater than it is to purchase water from Zone 7. And that is reflected in rates. And so when 25% of that water comes from the city's groundwater, you see that rate. So there is a financial benefit to pumping our groundwater ourselves. And when you start factoring in PFAS treatment, that benefits may still exist. Although it will be more costly to pump groundwater and treat it with PFAS, to just go over to zone 7 fully, there will be costs there. They will likely have to treat PFAS. So, and that's something, but there's definitely a financial benefit that may not go away just because of PFAS treatment. And then the last one is reduced reliability to meet peak summer demands. So for us, currently during the summer, we typically run 2 of our 3 wells in addition to what we're pulling from zone 7 to meet peak demands. And if we lose the wells, we'd really have to look into our ability to get all that water from zone 7. Over the course of a year, yes, we can definitely get that volume at whatever financial premium it is. But there is some limitations in getting a certain amount of water at a certain amount of time. And that is something that there is some limitations that we'd have to look at, whether we can do that and whether we'd have to construct some improvements to be able to meet that. And, you know, this got tested out this past summer. We didn't have well 8 because of PFAS, and we had a failure with our motor in our well 5. So we were down to 1 well coming up upon the summer peak demand. And we worked with zone 7 to get more water out of the turnouts than we normally do. But we definitely were pushing the envelope for it. You could definitely see it. So is there a possibility to get all our water from zone 7 even during the peak demands? Yes, but the reliability is a concern, and that would be something we would have to address if we were to lose our wells. So our work plan at the city level to address PFAS is basically two items. One is self-implementing PFAS treatment at the groundwater wells. So that's what we're looking at doing. What would it take to treat PFAS at each groundwater well? The other is looking at a more regional solution. Can we do PFAS treatment, say, at a regional facility where zone 7 and the city of Pleasanton pump their water to a regional facility with the idea that you may save money in cost because of economy of scale. To tell you with so far the fact that zone 7 needs treatment at the chain of lakes and we need treatment on Santa Rita, that makes this very difficult to do. The cost to pump water to one facility probably offsets any gain you're going to get financially, but it's something that's still on the table to look at as each of us go down further. The other item we are doing is looking at reducing or eliminating city well production, and offsetting with zone 7. So although it doesn't seem like it may be the best financial thing, that is something we're looking at is what if we just abandon our wells and buy more water from zone 7? What would that look like? How would that play out? We're not, even though there was a lot of, I would say in the last slide, cons, right? Reliability, price, we are keeping this option going in parallel. But right now, our major focus is self-implementation, mostly because by 2023, we feel there is a significant chance that we're going to have to meet those regulations, and this self-implementation probably gives us the best ability to do this and control that. So here's kind of our work plan. The items in red is basically our project to do self-implementation of PFAS treatment. So we've already done a feasibility study that said that it is feasible to do this treatment at our wells. We've also looked at the condition of our wells. We don't want to invest a lot of money into PFAS treatment and then have an old aging well facility that it's going on. So we're looking at not only PFAS treatment, but looking at the condition of the wells and what we need to do to extend the life of the wells so that we have a good life left on them. And we've completed that already. The checkpoints are where we've been typically checking. Well, we'll be checking in with council and giving an update and guidance on direction. And so we did do that just recently at the council meeting, and council did approve us to continue with this process. So what we have now, we're in the second red box here called well 5, 6, and 8 basis of design report. And the purpose of this is really to narrow down on what this project would look like. How would we do the treatment? What would it cost? How much construction, how much O&M, really narrow down on that so we can form a good project and have the total cost. Because what we want to do with that cost is roll that into rate studies and figure out how does that impact rates? How does that impact funding sources? But the first step is getting that solid number of what that number is. And so that's where we're at right now. We're hoping to be done by the probably March of next year, where we'll go back to council and give them an update on that. We'll also try to give them an update on some of these below, which is what's going on with the regs. Has there been any change in MCL or any change in the trends towards what an MCL may be? Has anything come out with Zone 7 and regional efforts? And then how does funding? How did the funding look for this? So I would say in March of 2021, that's going to be a big meeting to really decide the impact to the city. If that's something that still looks feasible, then the next step would be to actually work on final design. And so that's actually designing the treatment system so that we could get it ready for construction. In the end, you could see our timeline. We're trying to shoot for that fourth quarter 2023, where this is really high level right now. There's a lot of variabilities, and we'll learn more as we go, but this is the rough schedule we have right now. So I think that was kind of the general overview. I tried to hit as many questions. Sorry if that was a little confusing. I know that's a lot at once. But I think at this time, maybe it's best if we could go to questions. If you do have more specifics, I think we could probably answer those for you.
Well, Todd, that was outstanding. And I do appreciate how you handled each of the questions. That was outstanding. I think Brock would like to ask a question. It looks like John Sensiba also has a question in the chat. I saw John's first. Todd, can you see the chat?
Hold on.
If not, I can just read his question.
Yeah, I can't, for some reason, my when I'm sharing the screen, it's taken away my chat.
Yeah, no problem. John, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask the question, or you want me to read it?
Sure. First, Todd, thanks very much. I agree with Jill. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate that. My question is, if we did partner with Zone 7 for treatment, could we avoid pumping to the joint facility from our wells by blending the treated water with our well water prior to delivery to users? So would that might be one way to save money by partnering with them to have that facility and then just blending it with our well water?
You're saying, can we take like Zone 7's treated water and blend it with ours?
Well, you mentioned during your presentation that it might not be possible to joint venture with Zone 7 for the reverse osmosis plant because we would have to pump our well water back to that facility or to that facility. And that might offset any cost savings that we recognized by jointly treating the water with Zone 7. But if we did partner with Zone 7, treated all the water that was coming in except for our well water, would we be able to blend that and then avoid the cost of having to pump that well water to that joint station?
Yeah, and here's the tricky part about blending water. So because of the way regulations work, you have to blend water before it leaves the well and goes into your system. So in actuality, our water is blended, right? Even as it is today. Water comes down the turnout, comes into our distribution system, and our groundwater comes in there and it does get blended. But because there's so much variability and you can't guarantee how that's being blended, you can't monitor that, that's not considered sufficient blending. So the reality is you have to blend prior to entering the distribution system. And there's a lot of cost associated with that, because we essentially have to take our groundwater and put it into some type of tank and then blend it with what's coming from Zone 7. And we have looked into that even in our feasibility study, and it's just not very technically feasible to do that. It is costly. So unfortunately, although initially it sounds like why not do that, there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built to even properly blend. And so it becomes an economic cost.
Got it. Thank you, Todd.
I have a question.
Okay, I saw Brock raise a hand first, and then we'll get to you, Brad. Thank you, guys. Brock, go ahead.
Yes, great. Thanks, Todd. I have a couple quick technical questions, and then what I would say a couple fun ones. Just for clarification, PFAS is only in groundwater, right? So we're not worried about any surface water, state water project. There's no PFAS there, correct?
Correct. For our source, PFAS has been tested in the surface water and was not found in there.
Okay. And we do have some wells that are consistently over the notification level. Does city council announce that at each of their meetings? Is it in the agenda, or how often is it?
So I don't know that it's announced at each council meeting, but there has been 2 or 3 council meetings where we have presented numbers similar to what you saw today. It's also on our website. Data is posted for Zone 7 and City is posted on the website. And I can't remember what month it was, maybe Kathleen will remember, but we actually did a whole public notification process where we mailed a PFAS flyer and data to every one of our customers. So there was a very conscious effort by the city to get this information out there. Even honestly, it's not required to do that because we have shut down our wells, but that was over the response level. But the city just did that anyway.
Good. And then what I say, a couple of fun ones. Is there a theory on why Mocho 1 is so high? In other words, something historic that took place there. And then lastly, knowing what you know, do you drink our city water?
So your first question, there is no current idea of where the source is coming from. There's definitely an area right by the Santa Rita area, the Mocho area, where the values are higher. So there's obviously a plume where the concentration's higher there. I would say that Zone 7, as the groundwater monitor of the groundwater basin, they have more of the ability. Right? We're kind of restricted on what we have. Our wells are just right here. We don't have a lot of data. Zone 7 is going through a process to try to answer that question a little better. I think their next board meeting, they have hired a consultant to help give them some direction on that, and they'll probably be talking about that. But I think that's, at this point, there's no clear answer to that. But that is something they're looking at. For your second question, yes, I live in the Pleasanton. I live actually by Santa Rita. Yes, I drink the water. I get asked that a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a question that a lot of staff get, and absolutely we drink the water.
Fantastic.
And I think the other thing we get is, well, I don't drink the water and I drink bottled water. The thing that people don't understand about bottled water is it's not regulated. So we know that our water is regulated by state and federal regulations. And so we can tell you exactly what's in the water that you're drinking. You go to bottled water, you don't know. And there has been some recent tests come out in regards to testing bottled water for PFAS also. So, you know, I do encourage people to look into it on their own. We've also gotten the question about home treatment systems. And although as a city organization, we don't recommend, you know, a particular brand or anything like that, we have included some information on our website so customers can do their own research and due diligence in looking at home treatment options as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, Brad, you're up.
Okay, two non-technical questions. And Todd, that was terrific. I hope at some point you'll be able to make a similar presentation to the general public. So two non-technical questions. How does total city water consumption this year compare to last year because of COVID-19 year, what we're going through? And secondly, what is the short-term next 2 or 3 years outlook for extending purple pipe system? And in the wisdom of Mark Twain, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
So for your first question, water consumption this year is almost identical to last year. Maybe a little bit higher, but within the same amount. You know, a number that I personally use to help try to track that and keep it simple is I take all the water demand for the year and divide it by the rough population of our city, right? And so you get a water gallons per capita per day. That's a number that you'll hear a lot in the industry. Pre-drought, we were in the 220s. During the drought, we went all the way down to 140. The last couple of years, we've been in the 160s, low 160s, and it's the last 2 or 3 years, last 2 years is kind of settled in at 160. I have no idea if it will stay that way. It's very variable. If you plot the curve, it jumps, you know, we don't know how we respond back, but the last couple of years have been pretty steady at that new number. Your second question was, I think, oh, it's purple pipe. In terms of purple pipe, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years was really the ramp up of expanding the purple pipe. At this point, you know, we're starting to hit a little bit more of our projected build out. So I would say that the connections are going to start to slow down. We're definitely hitting kind of our infrastructure system max right now. And we're slowing down with the number of connections that are left to be made. So we're starting to hit that number that we were shooting for.
And I'll add a little bit to that. So there are still a few customers within Hacienda Business Park that aren't hooked up yet. Our last part of the project where we did pipe expansion was along Valley Avenue. It went to one of the bridges going across the arroyo. That's where we've stopped thus far. However, there's still a council priority for us to continue looking at expanding recycled water. So when we have collaborated with DERWA, so DSRC and East Bay Mud for recycled water, we also calculated in recycling, using recycled water at our golf course. So that would be the further expansion that we would look into for purple pipe to get water up to the golf course. But we haven't done a kind of a complete feasibility study just on that expansion of the recycled water project. So that would be the next phase if the city were to move into expansion, would be looking to get water up to the golf course.
Herb, I saw your hand next.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen, Todd, and Dan. Great information. With the state mandated RENA numbers coming out and the forecasts with the water supply, we always get questions. How can we add more houses if we have no more water? Are we budgeting for what the mandate's telling us we're going to have to do within our water system?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that on. So you know, right now, Zone 7 is in the middle of the demand study, and they're looking at precisely that. So Zone 7 looks at the regional demands and is projecting those build out build-out numbers, the ones you're talking about, and that goes into all their supply estimates. So the language we use in the water world is supply planning and demand planning, and we mush them together and just call it supply and demand planning. So that's what's going on there. It's pretty intuitive what's going on regarding that. So that planning is regular. It happens. I don't know exactly what the cycle is for Zone 7, but it happens every couple of years or some known interval of time. So for the City of Pleasanton, what happens with the retailers, so Pleasanton, Livermore, Dublin. So we have a closer look at what's going on with the population growth within those areas. We're feeding information up into those planning efforts. So we're talking to our planning department. We're looking at projected increases in numbers, and then collectively we're feeding that up to Zone 7. So there's a collaboration that goes on during these demand planning exercises and supply planning exercises. So to answer your question, the answer is yes. We are looking at the future build out, and typical water supply planning is based on that expected build out, and so that's always the target we're looking at, and then that happens throughout across the years. So and as that changes, then adjustments are made. So regarding the supply piece, which is what we opened up with it, what Todd started talking about originally, what happens with allocations from the state. So one of the things that you saw there is that because the allocations do vary, you're 20%, and right now it's 20% for Zone 7. But again, those numbers are flexible. But what everybody sort of looks to is that some years you have good years, some years you have bad years, and then there's some storage going on, and so generally across time we're still okay in a lot of those numbers, and so that's how the planning is worked out. And then there's analysis that goes on top of that, which is what happens if things go really bad. You're in a multiple year drought, things like that, and then the layer that goes on top of that is what they call conservation measures. So that's where you'd be looking for reductions in use from customers. And again, that flows out of, I think there's a pun there, flows. But it flows out of Zone 7's projections and what's available into, for example, us, City of Pleasanton. Hey, here's the realities, and here's where we're going to start asking people to curtail the use, reduce the amount of water. And so you've seen how that plays out over the last few years. So it changes. And so there is in summary, there is a long-term planning effort that goes on, and it's nearly continuous in nature. And it does account for population variations within the region, and then also specifically within the retailers, and in our case, the City of Pleasanton. And that information is going back and forth between the planning agencies. Zone 7 in this case, and we do some locally. So hopefully that answers your question about how that looks in the trajectory.
Yeah, just the challenge we get like on planning is, you're telling us to quit using water, and then you're saying we're building 2,300 more homes. And
Right.
That's the challenge. And if we can't make sure we're showing the public that demand can support it, then we get beat up at, council or planning. So that's all. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, so that table that Todd showed earlier is a perfect example of looking at, hey, we're either in surplus or we're in deficit, and that's something that Zone 7 sees.
One other piece, Herb, I think to answer your question too, is that we're actually going through I'll just call it, for simplicity, a water master plan update. And so we're looking at all of that. So we're looking at, the city's general plan build out, and we take all that into consideration through this master planning process. And so we can really provide you as a commissioner the information when applicants come up to you or you get asked, do we have enough water to be able to meet the demand of future development? And so we take all of that into consideration when we're putting these documents together.
Well, I see Angela Ramirez Holmes on the call, and Zone 7 is doing some really smart pre-planning to diversify our supply of surface water. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, Angela, but being part of the Sites Reservoir and Los Vaqueros Reservoir projects could really help to mitigate some of the problems with the South Bay Aqueduct and other things that people are anticipating. So I don't know if you want to mention anything there. Hearing none, but feel free to jump in, Angela, if you want to. Anybody else have questions? Anybody? I put a couple of things in the chat. Zone 7 did commission a study to try and find the source of PFAS, and the initial study dropped, I think it was last Thursday. I put a link to that in the chat. Also, I'm always plugging my brilliant Pleasanton students over the summer. They worked with Zone 7 with Olivia Sanwong and some other folks to create a documentary about Pleasanton's water, the history of it, the present situation, and what we can expect in the future. And it's very science-based. It was done in collaboration with a lot of folks. And even though it doesn't address PFAS, it does address where our water comes from. And so it's worth a look. I put the link there in the chat. Any other questions from anybody? No? Well, thank you, Kathleen and Dan and Todd. That was outstanding. Hope everybody has a great day. And thank you so much, Kate, for opening us up today.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
All right, everybody have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.